Again, thank you all very much for coming. We're going to get started in just a minute. Maddie McGraw, who's the director of the museum, is out there rounding folks up. And tonight's talk is sponsored by the City of Springfield's History Museum and the Springfield Library Foundation. Great organizations. I very, very much appreciate them. Where is Mindy Linder here?
She's on vacation.
Oh, okay. I'll still be here. Yes.
Is this thing on? Thank you all so much for joining us for our first History Night at the Wildish, celebrating local history and the launch of the Springfield Museum's new online catalog. If you haven't already, make sure to stop by the lobby to learn more about our new catalog, with over 5,000 historic photos of Springfield and rural Lane County now accessible to the public. Was made possible through the support of the Springfield Public Library Foundation and in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, through the Oregon Library Services and Technology Act, administered by the State Library. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's historian. A native of Louisiana, Steve has been the historian for the Oregon Asian Celebration for over 20 years. He's also a recognized authority on the Oregon writer Opal Whiteley. Steve was born in 1951 and grew up on the Lick Skillet Ranch in rural Louisiana and Texas. He loved to read books as a youth, often disappearing for hours into the woods with his dog and horse. Steve credits his grandmother with inspiring his love for history. He worked in railroad construction while in college, and in 1976, he moved from New Orleans to Cottage Grove, Oregon. He's recognized as one of the leading authorities on the Oregon writer Opal Whiteley. In 1994, Steve founded the Opal Whiteley Memorial in Cottage Grove to bring attention to mental health needs in our community. Opal Whiteley was a best-selling nature writer in 1921 and grew up near Cottage Grove. He was later asked by the University of Oregon to assist in publishing Opal Whiteley's best-selling diary online. He collected dozens of historical photographs of the people and places Opal wrote about. In addition to being on the steering committee of the Oregon Asian Celebration, Steve also serves on the boards of the Cottage Grove Historical Society and the Singing Creek Educational Center. I feel very lucky to think of him as one of my friends. So without further ado, here's Steve.
Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Maddie, for that really nice introduction. I really appreciate y'all coming out here tonight, and the weather even cooperated with us. So I'm going to get started here because we have I think it's a really epic story. It's got a grandeur, a sweep of grandeur. It's got heroes, it's got villains, it's got all kinds of skullduggery. It's got folks that just are determined not to be kept down. And it happened all just about 10 or 12 miles from here in the little community of Mohawk, Oregon. The title of the talk, Pyongyang school bombings, the Boxers versus the Highbinders. And there were 5 attacks on this school between 1895 and 1901. 5 attacks. There's 2 fires and 3 bombings. So, and on many of the slides here, you'll see that asianoregon.org. That's my website where you can go and read a lot more, because in a short talk, I can't get into all the nuances. But if you really want to take a deep dive into what happened out there at Pyongyang, go to my website, asianoregon.org, and here is a 30-page article with 30 pages, 70 footnotes. All the footnotes are in hyperlinks, so you can click on one of these links and go in and read the original source document, newspaper article, or something. And like I say, it is an epic story because it's one of the biggest unsolved crimes in Oregon history. And I think we're going to go a ways towards solving it tonight. First, this is what I did when I first came to Oregon. I was working railroad construction in Louisiana. I grew up in a family of contractors. And this is me in 1975 on the Round River Bike Trail outside of Cottage Grove, which is railroad tracks then, but now it's just a beautiful bike trail. Another great place if you're not familiar, just go down to Cottage Grove, a wonderful place to visit, and go up the Round River Trail, up the Round River Valley. By the way, when you're down in Cottage Grove and you see the word R-O-W, do not pronounce that road. They'll know you're an out-of-towner. It's Row, because it's named for fighting. Quite a peaceful area pretty much now. Now, I've got 3 mentors that were very important to me in putting this talk and the work I've done together. If I can find my notes, I'll introduce them to you. The first one I want to mention is Dr. Lynn Anderson from the University of Oregon's Center for Advanced Technology and Education. And is Lynn here tonight? Okay, I know we've got someone who was with CATE, the Center for Advanced Technology and Education. Now, they hired me in the late 1990s to put Opal Whiteley's diary online and then fill it up with the actual pictures of real people that she talks about. And all the names were changed in the book, so it's kind of a challenge. But it was just filled with all the, when Opal writes about her mother, there's a picture of her mother. When she writes about her aunt, there's a picture of her aunt. And it was just a great thing. And this woman here, Lynn Anderson, did it. Now, she sent me out looking for information about Opal Whiteley. And I knew that Opal had lived in the Marcola area as a small child. But nobody had ever done any research there. She's only 3 years old when she left, so it wasn't much. So I went to Marcola really looking for Opal Whiteley. This is a picture of her at age 9 in the Walden School at Cottage Grove, just to give you a little idea of who she was. As you can see from her features there, these early school photos are just great for really catching the ethnicity in people, because you see there's definitely you know, an ethnicity there. And this is the inside of the Walden School that Opal went to. Date March 27, 1907. Now this is where the talk really starts, because I like to take care of cemeteries, and a really beautiful one here in Glenwood between Springfield and Eugene is the Laurel Grove Cemetery. And that's where I met the historian Curtis Irish. And right up here, see Opal Whiteley's grandparents, her aunt, and her mother are buried there. So I was there, I think it was before Memorial Day around 1999, and I was trying to hang wind chimes on a tree to mark the grave where people could find it. So here I am. I use a garden hoe and I pull down the limb, and then I'll put up the wind chime. And I'm standing there pulling and pulling and pulling, and I couldn't get the limb quite down far enough to get the wind chime on it. And they're about 30, 40 yards away. I see this old man walking around the graveyard. Now, usually you don't interrupt people at graveyards, at kind of sacred places. People are often remembering their ancestors or doing important research, so it's not a great place for making friends. So I saw this man, and I knew right then and there I had to talk to him. I didn't know why, but I knew it was more than just putting up the wind chime. I had this compulsion. I just saw him, and I knew I had to meet this man. There was something important, and I knew if I didn't, I would lose something. And that turned out to be so true. This is Mr. Irish, and because I'm from rural Louisiana, and an older man, a mentor, you would always address as Sir and Mr. I never called him Kurt or Curtis, ever. And but here we are. We did an exhibit of photographs at the University of Oregon Library, and Mr. Irish collected 14,000 historical photographs of the Mohawk Valley. 14,000. Now, the first time I met him at Laurel Grove Cemetery, I thanked him for helping put the wind chimes up and introduced myself. Told him I was researching Opal Whiteley, and he said that he was from Marcola. And I said, oh, I'm interested in Marcola. Opal Whiteley lived out there in the logging town of Windling. Do you know anything about Windling, sir? That's Curtis Irish. So he had this gravelly voice that was just full of like gravel and wisdom. But he said, oh, sure, I live on Windland Road. I got about 600 pictures. You want to come see them? I was there that very night. And that very night, it changed my life. Because it was late, after 11, maybe close to 12, and I found the first newspaper article that led to this talk and the whole research project about the Pyongyang school bombing. Now today, Mr. Irish passed away a couple of years ago,
And today his farm, that he was born in that house and came close to dying in it, but he was born in that house, and that was his family farm, and he left that family farm to the Marcola School District to be used as a farm to teach students with. And they had this really cool farm stand there. They call it the Vegucation Station. And you can drive there and buy wonderful vegetables. And I have, all through this talk, I'm going to be encouraging you to actually go out in these places. And Mr. Irish's house in Marcola is a place that's almost always open. And you can go there and pick up vegetables, leave a contribution there. And it's right across the street from the Marcola School. So Mr. Irish was, I certainly wouldn't be doing this talk without him, both the information he gave me, but more than that, he taught me how to be a historian. He taught me how to go and speak to people and ask to see their precious family photographs and convince them that I was going to treat them respectfully. My other mentors, and there's a few of them here tonight, from the Oregon Asian Celebration. For about 20 years, I've been the chair of this heritage exhibit here of the celebration, and it's been a wonderful journey. We have presented all kinds of stories. The heritage exhibit tells the story of Asian immigrants once they got to the U.S. Well, I don't know a doggone thing about China or other than what I saw in Bruce Lee movies. But I've gotten to become a pretty good expert on once Asians, especially early Asians, came here to Oregon. And this has just been probably the greatest honor of my life, be involved with them. Now, just to give context here and show you the presence of Asians at this time in history in our community. And this is from Cottage Grove. You know, it's just about 20-something miles from here. This is a parade from the late 1800s. The original photograph is a much larger perspective, and I was looking at it on a wall one time, and suddenly I saw something that just looked odd, and nobody else had ever noticed it. And the photograph had been around over 100 years, reprinted countless times. What I saw was this man down here and this carriage. Let's blow him up and see what we got. See, this is a man pulling a rickshaw. And you see this is a woman here, probably Japanese, the parasol, probably wearing a kimono, the hair, and that could be an Akita dog, which is the dog of national dog of Japan. But I just found that picture just so interesting because we don't have that many pictures of Asians or minorities around. Most people take pictures of their own family, and they keep those. They don't really collect and keep pictures of folks that's not really related. Now, to show you where we're going, most of y'all know, but Marcola is about 15 miles northeast of Eugene, and you just go out Marcola Road over here where Albertsons and Rite Aid is, and just go on. First place you come to is Mohawk. That's the first place we'll be going. And then if we have time, we'll get up to Maple, which had a Japanese colony in 1925. Now, I'm not making that up. The registered guard called it Japanese colony. And then we've done some more background research to show who all was out there. I have on my website this driving tour, and I really encourage y'all to go out there. It's a wonderful afternoon drive. And the first stop is Pingyang, which is also known as Mohawk Oregon, and then the second stop up at the Japanese colony at Shotgun Creek. And this store, built in 1914, is still there. It is a great historic place to go in. And the Pingyang School was in front of the store, back about there. And here is where I think the school actually was. Now, this is a view from the Mohawk Road, and that's Hill Road where it comes in. That's the store we just saw. And there is the Mohawk Community Church. Been a church there for, wow, way over 100 years. Way over 100 years. And I think over this fence here, and this is a field that's grown over, I think that was the location of the Pingyang School. It's somewhat possible it was in the church parking lot, but somewhere within like a 50-yard area. And one of the things I'd love to do sometime is to get the money and support to do a real, to do real research out there and find where the school was, because after being set on fire and blown up 3 times, there will be some old, it was a log school, there'll probably be some old charred remains and nails and things, big nails, because it was a log school. Now, this is not just a simple case of, like you might think of racism or something. There were about 10 factors overall in these 3 bombings and 2 fires. But the interesting thing is, 1, who did the bombings, and 2, why wasn't anybody ever arrested? I mean, blow up a school 3 times, set it on fire twice in 6 years. That's kind of serious. That's kind of serious. Well, the location of the school was controversial, and that's mentioned in practically every newspaper article that was written about the Pingyang School. Now, most communities and neighbors get used to a new school. You know, you might not like it built, might block your view somewhat, but you don't blow it up. And for some reason, this school kept getting blown up. Now, then there was a major feud between 2 local leaders, and you could not find 2 men more different than Reverend John Mulkey and Joseph Huddleston. They were both from pioneer families that came out there. They had argued so much that, do y'all know what a devil's lane used to be, or a no man's lane? When this is before accurate surveying, and when 2 parties living next to each other could not get along, they create like a 10 or 20 foot devil's lane between them. And I read that these 2. Now here's one motive that comes up over and over and over. Joe Huddleston did not like the sound of the school bell ringing in the morning. Woke him up. And he didn't like to wake up early. And he hated the sound of the children playing on the playground. Like I say, most people get used to this. And there weren't that many kids. I think it's Pingyang had about 25 children. So we're not talking about a big mob making a whole lot of noise. And there's one story that says the students themselves bombed it to get a better school. Now keep in mind, we're talking about 3 bombings over a 6-year period. So we're going to explore that a little more, because, that's an interesting question. And here's other reasons. Like, why was he arrested? One of the factors involved in it, the school was being used to campaign against alcohol in 1896 during the presidential election of William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley. Now, if William Jennings Bryan had won that election, we would have had prohibition 25 years earlier than what we did. So this was a hot contested election between prohibitionists and anti-prohibitionists. There was gigantic growth in the Mohawk Valley after the logging town of Windling was built. And it was one of the first corporate logging towns built by investors, not family and friends to going in together, like most of the small logging outfits were. Windling was gigantic. The town of Windling, I think, had 500 to 800 people. Might have been the first, or certainly no more than the 3rd fully electrified city in the state of Oregon. this growth started in 1895, and you just can't underestimate what an impact that had, because people came to Windley from all over the world. They needed workers badly. And then religious fights over the school, which was being used as a church. Early schools were, some of the only public buildings, so they'd be used as a church or a civic hall or maybe a trial. And this church had something a little different, though, at least for a time. It had a woman preacher. And, that is still, in some denominations, controversial today. And back at the turn of the century, it was real controversial. And this Joe Huddleston, in this campaign against alcohol, what did he do? He made Pingyang brandy. And the Eugene Register Guard called him the Republican boss of Mohawk and complimented him on his brandy. And kind of endorsed him that way. There's one story that the school was used for dances, but since the school was built by ministers, I don't know that alcohol was served there. Most Protestant churches didn't allow alcohol in there. And coming in 1900 is where I think we see the majority of the racist anti-Chinese imagery. Twice, Joe Huddleston is said to have used this imagery of Chinese and Asia that today just any reasonable person would say is pretty doggone offensive. But I've been criticized and people have said, well, you're blowing this story up too much, Steve. Maybe it happened, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Like 3 bombings and 2 fires is not a big deal. And it's been said that there's not a single historical document referring to any, and it says here, Orientals in this part of the valley, other than photographs of 2 men that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. That the stories about the Pingyang school were just stories. And none of that's true, folks. It's out there on the web, but it is not true. And tonight, I hope, even if you don't agree with everything I come up with here, I hope you know that there's more to this story than meets the eye. Now, here is old Joe Huddleston. He is, by everybody's account, the man who names the Pingyang school. Now, how on earth does a school out near Marcola get named Pingyang, an Asian name? It's actually Korean for Phnom, but Americans didn't know how to spell that, so Pingyang, a lot easier. And in 1894, there was a giant war between Japan and China for control of Korea. And in that war, this man, James Creelman, the classic war correspondent, wrote these dispatches, and throughout the dispatches that were printed all over the United States, the Chinese are the villains and the Japanese are the heroes. Now, Huddleston is getting ready to raise hell in Mohawk because he doesn't want this new school. So as soon as this battle happens, he names the school Pingyang, because we're going to fight over it. Now here's a little something about James Creelman. Today he's called the father of human rights journalism. That's what older people, we grew up with the term yellow journalism, but today called human rights journalism. He interviewed everybody who was anybody at the turn of the last century. And what I like it for, his son wrote the screenplay for King Kong, so he's got to be a good fellow. But yeah, his dispatches were read everywhere, and they were gripping. In fact, I'm going to give you a flavor of what the first paragraph here, because it really shows this Japanese heroes and Chinese villains. It says up here, the armies of Asiatic barbarism and Asiatic civilization, once China, once Japan, met on this ground to fight the first great battle of the war. And here Japan emancipated the helpless Korean nation from the century despotism of China. Now, if you know your history, you know that this liberation didn't last that long, and it was in the 1940s, World War II, that we went in, and the Japanese occupied Korea, from 1894 to the 1940s, roughly. Now, the Battle of Pyongyang turns out to be very good PR for Japan. And here's a report that the Foreign Office in Idaho wrote up and sent back to Japan. Japan kept very close track on the workers they had here. And they had this paragraph down here talking about when railroad construction began 4 years ago, which would be 1895, 1896, hostile whites attempted to force the Japanese out. But these threats soon subsided, and the victory of that war caused many whites to change the way they viewed the Japanese. Now, white laborers were still paid more. They're paid $1.50 a day. But it says here the Japanese were more diligent workers. And I can testify that as someone who did railroad construction, it is teamwork. And the Asian teams were much better at working railroad construction than the Irish or the Mormons were. Just a cultural thing. And this is a great book by Mr. Lou Polly. Not perfect. He published in 1984. Mr. Lou Polly grew up out in the Mohawk Valley, and the book is a history of the Mohawk Valley and early lumbering. And this is where a place where I found some more early info about Joe Huddleston, because he has this great story about the schools out in Mohawk. Now, he says here that they had an election over to build a school or not, and Huddleston campaigned against building the school. Don't know exactly why. Maybe he didn't want the taxes. Maybe he thought the kids could walk further. Children used to be expected to walk 3 miles one way and 3 miles back the other way in rural areas. So he lost the election, but he didn't accept the vote. Did not accept the vote. And here he says the Mohawk school, why he didn't like it, he said that the pupils all sounded like a bunch of Chinese. And the bell that was ringing made it sound like ping-yang, ping-yang, ping-yang. Now, the other thing Mr. Huddleston did not like was the new railroad coming through that had a really loud bell. And railroad was loud. But that was something that was, the railroads were controversial. Most places wanted them. They meant an arrival of civilization, easy transport, but there were a lot of people who wanted to stick to pioneer ways. And I think old Joe was kind of like this. He had a brother that was very important in early Eugene real estate, but Joe himself seems to have been mostly a man of Mohawk. He'd been there since 1861, and he seemed a lot like a man I knew growing up in Lickskillet, who was a very powerful man and liked to have his thumb down on everything. So here is the new school. That was built after the Pyongyang school was completely destroyed. I don't think this is a picture of the actual Pyongyang school because it doesn't match some of the descriptions, but it's on the same page and he didn't label it. But here is probably the only photo of the Pyongyang school, and it doesn't show the school, and it's from 2 years after the final bombings. Now, what's interesting about this is that I've never found a picture of the Pyongyang school, and you would have thought that somebody or a newspaper would have taken one. I mean, there's a school blown up. That would be photogenic to me and most people. Or, most early schools had photographs of them. You can find, in fact, it's rare, unless the school is very, very old, that you don't find a good photograph of it. But here are the kids, 1903, and this picture was sent to me from Heather Newman, who was the great-granddaughter of a student in the picture. And this is the teacher over there. This was a man. He taught there, briefly after the final bombing. Now, to put this in a little context, I want to tell y'all what teaching school was like for early teachers. These rules they actually come from California, but I found ones in Oregon later. They're pretty much the same. And I'll just go through several of them, because there's 12. The first one is, you will not marry during the term of your contract. 2, you are not to keep company with men. 3, you must be at home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless attending a school function. Nor can you go into ice cream stores. And you can't ride in a carriage or an automobile with any man unless he's your father or brother. Yeah. See, you had to be dedicated to be a teacher, and many of the early ones weren't married. They put their lives and their career into bettering students' lives, and I think we owe a great debt to these early teachers. Last one down here is, you got to be at the school at 7 a.m. to start the fire for the students, so it's those schools warm when they get there at about 8. So you see, being a teacher back then was not easy. As Miss Rietta Smith found out, she's the first teacher at the New Pyongyang School, and this is April 1895. It also says some other names we're going to be running into. Miss Fanny Hammett of Mohawk. Her family actually built the Hammett School, which was known as the Pyongyang School, and built that historic store that's out there today. So this article, school ma'ams, and lists them. Well, she only got to teach there about 2 weeks before the school gets blown up. Yeah, and the article here says a coal oil fire was set earlier, several sticks of dynamite used. This article is from the States' Rights Democrat in Albany, but there were a lot of articles about this because it was news. There was an article, a little newspaper, the Bohemian Nugget, out of Cottage Grove, the Bohemia Gold Mining District, even had a little article about it. Now, here's a couple of articles that covered this first bombing. I'm given the date of the newspapers there. The bombing actually happened in late April, I think. But it says that the school completely demolished by the dynamite, and there had been bad feeling in the neighborhood about the location, and attempts had been made to burn it up. And that's where this article here blown up, talks about the 2 fires. Now, the school was also, like I mentioned, early schools were used for a lot of public uses. The school was also being used by Free Methodists to evangelize people. Now, the unique thing about the Free Methodist is that they got that name Free Methodist going back to before the Civil War. The Free Methodists were the abolitionists who fought against slavery. And then later they went overseas doing a lot of missionary work in Asia and especially Japan. So this article says that they have an extended meeting there and they are recruiting a lot of people. Something else the Free Methodists were involved in was the fight for prohibition. It was an anti-alcohol church, as most Protestant churches were. And here's where I think one of the motivations and factors leading to the bombing, and there were a number of them. But here's where I think it's this 1896. The school is being used by supporters of William Jennings Bryan, because William Jennings Bryan was known as a Christian. He was the, if you remember the movie Inherit the Wind and the famous Scopes of Monkey trial between Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, that's who this is. And he's running for president. He and McKinley had two races, 1896 and 1900. And prohibition was a big issue. Like I say, if William Jennings Bryan had gotten elected, a lot of things would have been different, especially the prohibition issue. Now, Joe Huddleston runs for office out there, and the Register Guard calls him the Republican boss of Mohawk. And he makes this Pyongyang brandy after the school, less than a year after the school's been blown up. He comes out with the Pyongyang brandy, and the newspaper says, no wonder he captured the primaries with such an article of commerce. So he's giving away the brandy out there for votes. He was not a dumb man. He knew how to motivate people. Now here we get to the building of the railroad, and this is when people really start coming into the area. The first article, January 1900, it's Daily Eugene Guard. You might hear me say Eugene Register Guard because we're all familiar with the Eugene Register Guard, but there were several incarnations and names of the newspaper. So it's all, now here's 20 men come in, and they make a point that half of them were, as they say, Negroes. This is not something that most communities really wanted at the time, but they were very desperate to get track layers because it's difficult to do railroad work, and most guys don't want to do it. Here's an early train in the Mohawk Valley, and it was built on tracks that the Japanese built. Y'all familiar, most of y'all have probably been out to the Shotgun Creek Recreation Area, the BLM Shotgun Creek Recreation Area out there. It's got these 8 miles of wonderful hiking trails through there, nice and flat and wide. That's 8 miles of railroad track that the Japanese built, because that was a Japanese colony up there. Now, April something happens, the contractor goes bankrupt. These railroad workers aren't paid, and they are just dumped in the woods up there in Marcola. And fortunately, the Southern Pacific Railroad stepped in, make sure that the men got paid, and the railroad was built, which stimulated growth in the valley tremendously and made a lot of people rich. When I saw this article for the first time, kind of made my blood boil because I've done railroad construction and I know it's brutally hard work. So I had just a little idea of what those men worked for, and then suddenly to work and not get paid. Can't imagine what that. Now this is, I love this article because it's timely to our age too. It's White Men Quit. It's from the Brownsville Times, 1900. And it's saying that they can't get the white men to work. Frankly, jobs in the woods paid better, and it was easier work. Now I've done choker setting and logging in woods too, and I know of the two. I'd much rather do that than the railroad construction. And that's what and here is where they always, I'm going to use the terms that are in the article here. I apologize for that. But here they they almost always use the word Japs for Japanese. And this was the second time a failure had happened when they were trying to employ white labor. But then, a couple of weeks later, 60 Japs coming to build the railroad. And then the railroad construction really kicks off in earnest. This article from the Eugene Weekly Guard, 1900, it's nearly impossible to get track layers. Because, there's a lot of work in this country today that most people don't want to do. I don't want to do it. Most of y'all don't want to do it. So we have other people who were willing to do it. And out here at that time, one of the important things was who was willing to do the work and who would the community accept. Because the community would not accept Chinese, they would not accept African Americans, but they would accept Japanese because Japan was modernizing at the time. They were allowing Christian missionaries. They were requiring the samurais to put away their swords and dress in Western clothes. They were playing baseball. It was very different. Now, here are the founders of the town of Marcola, and Lou Pawley's book that I showed calls Columbus Cole a staunch Methodist. And we'll see in a minute, yes, that's very true. The original name of Marcola was Isabel, her middle name. But the railroad came through, and the railroad changed all the colloquial local names like Isabel. That was thought to be maybe too hard for their conductors and people to write down. So they wanted simple names. Pingyang became Donna. Isabel, which was the original name for Marcola, becomes Marcola, and her name is Mary. Her first name is Mary, and her last name is Cole. That's how we get Marcola from it. And look at this. Mr. Cole imported tea from Japan in his story. Here's a picture of the tea. And Lou Pawley's book said that he imported and sold many items from Japan. So he felt he had a market. And I bet that market he felt was going to be among people from Japan, because most rural store owners didn't import items from Japan. I'm not that familiar. I'll yield to anybody who's more knowledgeable about rural stores someplace else that imports from a place like Japan. And this is the label down here says Isabel, so it's right before the railroad comes. But they are expecting more Japanese there. Now, I am indebted to Deborah Monson, who's here tonight, president of the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, and one of the best researchers I've ever known. But I asked her to look up and see what she could find, because I was hearing that, hey, there were never any Japanese there in any number at all. And she found the 1900 Mohawk census, which has a bunch of Japanese and also Greeks and Italians. Now, Greeks and Italians were not especially welcome in Oregon. Oregon was one of the most, maybe the most anti-Catholic state in the entire Union. I think we're the only ones who actually passed a constitutional amendment, didn't last, but prohibiting a teacher from teaching in a religious garb, directly aimed at nuns. And the Greeks and Italians, not wanted, but they really needed workers. And these 692 people, this is gigantic growth in a small community, from the census of 1900, census to 1890. I'm going to try to put it in perspective to you how they might have felt at the time with this gigantic growth. Let's assume, for example, because these people that came were different from the folks that were here. Let's assume that in Eugene, Springfield, we got about 5,000 Republicans from Alabama. How do you think that would go over? You think we'd be talking about land use laws and where? Yeah, I think we might. We all have, one of the themes of this story is we all have this, there's a saying that the best of us have a little bit of bad, worst of us have a little bit of good. That's just unfortunately human nature. But here's what Deborah finds. The 1900 Mohawk census, it's got 50 Japanese workers. Now, I don't know about these young men. Most of them probably young. But the samurai family sent a lot of kids to the United States to work because they wanted them to learn technology. They figured, go learn the future and then bring it back home to Japan. But that's a significant number, 50. Out there in a small community like that, 50 Japanese. And up the road a few years later, we got families, not just single individuals building railroad tracks. We got families. Now, this is really my favorite part of the presentation, I think. This is a photograph of the Hayden family, 1899. There's kind of a calm between the battles over the school, and it kicks up back again in 1900, 1901. And Lorraine Hayden, who is here tonight, someplace, yes, over there. Lorraine Hayden, this is her family, and her late husband, Jim, gave me these photographs that you're going to show that documents something unique that we don't have in hardly any other photographs. Friendship. Yeah, friendship between folks here and folks from there. Now, this is Charlie Hayden here, young man, and his sister Ella. And what I love about Charlie Hayden gave up his own dreams of going to college, and he went to work, logging, working in mills, so he could pay for his sister Ella's tuition. And she went on and had like a 30-year career teaching in all over the Mohawk Valley. I just think that's a beautiful story. And they had 2 Japanese men living with them on this farm. And here's the youngest man. His name is Ishiro Madi. I've also heard it pronounced Madi, I think. And he stayed with the family. And on the back of this photo, see, this is one of those picture postcards. And on the back of the picture postcard, this is his address in Old Japanese. He and Charlie Hayden kept in contact with each other, his grandson told me, until World War II, when everything went to hell. And unfortunately, probably no records left because Ishiro lived in Hiroshima, and which was bombed. And I love this card too. This is Mr. Yoshihara from Okayama, and it was given to Charlie Hayden and Ella. And what's really neat about it is it's got the names of other people, John Barr and Lenora Haynes, and right here, and also his address in Old Japanese. Right here it says, "Thy is so good. Thy is so good." And which tells us he learned English from missionaries with the King James Bible. And that happened quite a bit, because that's what they used to teach them English with, King James Bibles. But I love that phrase, "Thy is so good." And these 2 photographs capture something that we don't have very much of. I found one good story about a couple of white gold miners buying the grave for a black gold miner up Blue River, who's a friend of theirs. But you don't have that many stories that look like actual friendships. Here you have something unique, actual friendships, where people keep in touch with each other. Now Charlie, this is when this is 1904, he enters divinity school. He also played the violin, but then he dropped out so he could send his sister to the university. 1904, Ella Hayden becomes a teacher at the Donna School, and the Donna School is also known as the Pingyang School. So anytime tonight I mention the Mohawk School, the Donna School, or the Pingyang School, or the Hammett School, I'm talking about the same school. And she becomes a teacher, has a great career. And this is something really cool. 1908, Ella Hayden, probably because of the help that Charlie was able to give her, but she goes to Europe. She visits London, Paris, Berlin. So I think a lot of people have a stereotype in their mind of people in rural areas being kind of ignorant, uneducated, and liking it that way. That is just not true at all. You have people who were extraordinarily, maybe they were self-educated and they passed around books a lot. Here's where we really get interesting. Guess who probably also taught at the Pyongyang school right before the final bombing? Maud Kearns, the famous art teacher who later goes on to have a great career for studies in Asian art. So here she is in April. The final bombing was in July 1901. But in April, she's teaching at the McGowan School, which is only like a couple of miles at most up the river. But then I've got another article in there saying that Miss Kearns is teaching at the Pyongyang School. And teachers moved around like that for a lot of different reasons. But there she is teaching just up the road. And she did have a sister who tried to teach school, but her niece told me that she didn't have the same temperament as Maud. So it's possible her sister's involved, but that gives us two current women in the same location. Now this is a wonderful magazine article from the West magazine, I think April 1963, The Boxers versus the Highbinders. And this is the nephew of the author. Now, highbinders, that is a slur term for the way some Asian cultures, the men wore their hair in a knot behind their head. We'll show you why that got into the story. Here's a picture of the builder and defender of the Pyongyang School. Reverend John Mulkey and his wife live out there on Mohawk, pretty close to where the Mohawk Community Church is today. Reverend Mulkey had a long, long, long beard, and he tied it up in a knot and put it behind his back. Joe Huddleston starts calling him a highbinder and a Chinaman. And this is where he starts bringing the Boxer Rebellion to Mohawk. Now, if you're not familiar with the Boxer Rebellion, this is Reverend Mulkey and his wife, a little bit closer up picture. She didn't, one of her knees didn't work right, so she had a hard time walking, and Huddleston mocked her for that. We have, now in doing history, you've got a number of different kinds of evidence. One is period evidence. Period evidence is a newspaper article or a letter or a photograph, something written at the time. Now, eyewitness reports or accounts can be written decades later, and they're important, but memories might have changed. So Claude Hammett knew Joe Huddleston just about all of his life. His family owned the Mohawk store, built the school. He was a student at the school, or the one that was right next door. And you know, with school bombing, all the boys are going to talk about the school bombing. I mean, you guys know that out there. If the school gets blown up, all the kids are going to talk about it. And he's the one who really puts out the idea that Huddleston did not like school bells because they would wake him up too early. It was reasonable, I guess. And he drank grain alcohol very heavily. But some of the more interesting things, because none of these folks are true caricatures. Joe Huddleston lived among the Indians out there, and he knew their language. He could recite like the part of the Declaration of Independence in the local native language. He had a family of neighbors that had mental retardation. He helped take care of them. He was very against that new school, but don't think he was a fool. This man was really well educated. like a lot of pioneer people did. They swapped books around. They read newspapers avidly. Newspapers weren't just read once and thrown away. They were passed around the community. And later, he was elected mayor, judge, and constable at different times. So the curious thing about Huddleston here is if he is not the bomber, and he's the only main name that's ever emerged as the ringleader, who was? And if he didn't do it, who did? And how did they get away with it? This guy was powerful. He was probably the most wealthy person in the area. He'd been there practically the longest. And you just didn't cross old Joe Huddleston. But he also had this gift for telling tall tales. And he would send little stories to the newspapers. This is a good one. He kills 36 deer with 36 shots, but missed one, and then he shot 2 deer with 1 bullet. So that's the kind of fellow Joe Huddleston was. He had that. That's why he was such a character and really liked. And I know, growing up in my home community of Lickskillet, Louisiana, on the Lickskillet Ranch, my grandfather was a man very much like Joe Huddleston, and he also had this, could be very mean, and he could be very tender. More mean than tender, but still. Now this is the store I've been showing you shortly after it was opened. Here are the railroad tracks, and the school that was blown up is about there where y'all are sitting. Here's where we get into the boxer about it. What on earth was that, and how did it get to Marcola and Mohawk, Oregon? Well, the boxer about it was an attempt in China between 1900 and 1901 to throw out all the foreigners. I think it was largely led by some of the martial arts schools that were temples too, and the Empress. But they wanted to get rid of all the foreign influence, especially the British, out of China in one big swoop. Now Mark Twain comes along, and Mark Twain wants to get rid of all the Chinese out of America. And he calls himself, I am a boxer. And that means, I want to get rid of the Chinese. Why? Mark Twain simply believed that they would outwork the whites. They would work harder, save their money, build a better family unity, do all the stuff you're supposed to do, and simply outcompete whites. And there's this famous line down here, China never wanted foreigners any more than foreigners wanted Chinamen. And on this question, I am with the boxers every time. The boxer is a patriot. He loves his country. I wish him success. The boxer believes in driving us out of his country too. I am a boxer too, for I believe in driving him out of our country. And Mark Twain, you hardly got any bigger in literature and as a name than Mark Twain at the turn of the last century. But what were the boxers? Okay, first of all, here's a couple of great pictures of this guy looks really serious. This young fella here, he's looks like he's having a good time. But they got the term boxer because the British did not have a term for martial artist. They just didn't know what to call it. The closest thing they had was the boxer. So they called them boxers. And this is a very dated, but you can find this movie any place. It was hugely popular when it came out in the 60s. 55 Days at Peking with Charlton Heston, and Ava Gardner, David Niven. And it's the boxer about him, and the international response to it lasts about 55 days. And there's much better documentaries on YouTube. So now here we get to where 1901, and the battle for this school is really starting to heat up. coming up to the final bombing. Here it is, April 15th. Someone named Ping Yanger, and you see this little news item, Mohawk items. Just the register guard used to print little items, little news items from small communities like Mohawk or Fern Ridge or maybe Dexter or just small communities, and they would print these little items of the news. And quite often people used a pseudonym. They didn't use their own name. This one is signed by Ping Yanger. It says, "We have got a woman preacher at Ping Yang." And again, you just can't overestimate how important that issue could have been in setting up a fire, or at least a tolerance where people were okay with letting this happen. And she writes, or he writes, "Ping Yang is badly in need of a little missionary work." What does that mean? And it's a school, it's being used as a church, built by a minister. What is the missionary work Ping Yang needs? And then this here, Miss Kearns is teaching at the Ping Yang school. I tend to think it was Maud Kearns, but she was at least up the road just a mile or two, and it could have been her sister Edith, who didn't teach for that long. But one or both of the Kearns sisters, who later became very interested and very influential in Asian art, were right there at Ping Yang. And I just can't believe, as interested as especially Maud Kearns later became in Asian art, that she's going to pass up an opportunity to actually meet and talk with Japanese people. And probably Ella Hayden, other teachers, got together like that. Now then a week later, somebody named Hayseed responds. And things start heating up. Says, "Ping Yang don't need no missionary, but some of the people who live around Ping Yang do need a missionary. And we hope they will be able to have one." So these things are heating up at this little school again. And then finally, July 15, 1901, this is the final bombing, the fifth attempt to destroy that school. The article says that suspicion points to certain parties. All through this, there were questions, and the suspicion was on Joe Huddleston. But it may have been as simple as people just were afraid to testify against him. He's a very powerful man. You didn't want to, But this is the article that I found at Curtis Irish's house the very first night that I went to Marcola. I'll tell you a little funny side note. I was sent there by Dr. Lynn Anderson at the University of Oregon to look for Opal Whiteley info. Didn't find that. Turned up this article, and in the middle of the night, I type her this email and say something like, "Gee, Lynn, I am real sorry about finding this. I actually apologize for finding this, because I knew as soon as I saw it, it was going to grab me. I had a feeling as soon as I found this article that it was unique, that it needed to be studied." So I wrote a letter to the department head saying, "Gee, I'm sorry I found this, because I've got to work on this." Now, this is the Morning Oregonian. Newspapers all over Oregon covered these bombings, I've just been interested. There's never been much of a scholarly attempt to understand the bombings and the factors and the perpetrators. And I think maybe maybe historians or sociologists at the time, I don't know if I'd want to go out to that place and, where somebody's blowing up a school, they've got people that help them and you don't know who they are. But this is the dynamite put underneath they say it's the result of an old feud, and by what I've seen, that feud seems to go back to Reverend John Mulkey and Joe Huddleston. Now, I've been challenged to provide what's called period evidence, that there was anything racial going on, that any racial allusions, as if naming a school and a whole area, Pyongyang, after a battle, didn't put some racial overtones on something. Because he did that to kickstart a fight. And there's very little doubt that Joe Huddleston did name the school and the community Pyongyang. But here we have, in 2 years after the final bombing, Reverend Mulkey dies. An article earlier said that he was in poor health. I think probably the strain of fighting for the school really took a toll on him. And there's in the top part of the article mentions his passing. And then at the bottom of the article, there is this really curious sentence. I love reading old historical articles. You just don't know what you're going to find. And this says, there are certain persons who might get along very well without spending too much time killing Chinamen. The Chinaman is in quotes in the original. So they're not talking about Chinese men. So that, first of all, they're talking about something else. And since Huddleston called Mulkey a highbinder and a Chinaman, Mulkey dies, this is probably referring to him. And I think it does show that racial insults and epithets were used around the Pyongyang school. It was part of the overall, let's get rid of this school, let's throw it out, get rid of them all. And I think it verifies Claude Hammett, who was a youngster when the bombings happened. I think it verifies his basic story. Now, the name Pyongyang did not end with the final bombing in 1901. Here is the Pyongyang Band, 1914. And this man right here on the lower left, that's our author, Claude Hammett. Wrote a number of articles for the Lake County Historian. And his family was really important in the area. They built the school, they built the store, and just very prominent family out there. It's got all the names of the band here. Now, Joe Huddleston died when he was 80 at a stroke. He had come there to the Mohawk. And by the way, if you don't, I'm sorry, I probably should have said earlier, we get the term Mohawk and Mohawk Valley. You might have heard of a Mohawk Valley in New York. That's where the real Mohawk Valley is. An early settler named Spores saw what we call today the Mohawk Valley and thought it looked just like his home area from New York. So he named the valley Mohawk. The name stuck. And the name also got applied to the Native Americans there, who were Kalapuya, but for decades were called Mohawks. He's buried in the Pioneer Cemetery next to the University of Oregon, which I find kind of ironic for a guy who didn't like schools. Now, they built a new school to replace the Donna School I showed you in 1964. And this little thing just says that it was verifies it was a log school, and that the district, it was one, before this Pyongyang stuff came up, there was one school district out there. And then Joe Huddleston starts up the Pyongyang, and suddenly the district divides itself into 3 or 4 separate districts. We're talking about small areas. I don't know if they really had, but there was something that made them divide themselves up into the districts. Now here we have a couple of great student accounts of the bombings. These were written at reunions that happened like 60 years after the bombings by students. And that's a long time. So, but there's some really colorful things in here. This article is written by a woman whose mother was a teacher there, Miss Marion Stafford. Stafford's very prominent. And here they talk about, since the school is being used as a church, they naturally had an organ. Now, a little hint, if you want to blow up, no. Anyway, the bomb was put underneath the organ because when you want force, you want to put something on top of the dynamite so it blows sideways. Y'all might remember that for future reference. You don't want to just set the bomb on top of the floor. And then a week later, Don Bishop, some of us older folks here will remember Don Bishop of the Registered Guard. He interviews Ida Sporsbow, a relative of the man who named Mohawk Valley, a former student at the school, and she said students themselves blew it up. And also, and I love this, the teacher had to tiptoe around a hole in the floor where a bomb had blown. Just imagine being a teacher and having to walk around a hole in the floor from a bomb, and you know that probably some of your students, there may have been 25 students at the school, some of your students had parents might have been involved in that, because this is real controversial right now. This feels so, that's, was that Maud Kearns who had to tiptoe around that? I don't know. And again, now, okay, if it's true that the kids bombed the school, you guys take a look at this picture. See any likely bombers? These are middle school kids and elementary kids. Nobody's going to give them dynamite 3 times. So they might have gone out there with their fathers or Joe Huddleston, but I just don't get that students blew it up, especially, talk about 3 bombings and 2 fires in 6 years. I don't buy that. But I'm not putting, that maybe this girl there, she might have gone out with her dad or something. Now, I should have said at the beginning, all the bombings were at night. Nobody was hurt. School was interrupted, but they kept rebuilding the school as soon as the bomb happened. But they deliberately didn't injure anybody. This is the school that opened in 1908, built to replace Pyongyang, and this is now a home out there. And down here, this was the school bus barn, but the Mohawk Community Church is right over here, and that historic store that I've been pointing out to you is right over here. But this is the Donna Mohawk School, built to replace it. And here's the kids. Love this picture. See how many of the kids had to go barefoot? I mean, so wasn't that easy to be a teacher or a student back then? A lot of little boys did not have shoes. I went to school with a couple of kids that didn't have shoes. And again, I want to show you this driving tour to Pyongyang and the forgotten Japanese colony at Shotgun Creek. You can find it on my website, asianoregon.org. It's a beautiful, beautiful drive in the valley out there. And this that I presented you has only been an overview of the conflict at Pyongyang. This article I wrote that I would like to even refurbish more, but it's like 30 pages long, 70 footnotes, and if you like, you can look out and you can find this, and it really is interesting that it's just amazing. This happens here, and nobody ever gets arrested. Now, I'm from a place where, especially right after the Civil War, and especially black children's schools, they were blown up regularly. But I don't recall, even in where I grew up, 5 attacks on one school. Something's going on there that not only Joe Huddleston doesn't like, because I really believe it was just one loony man, no matter how powerful, they would have busted him. There's socially acceptable reasons why that school was allowed to be attacked, or that they couldn't stop it. And I've been called down on, why even want to remember this old bad stuff? It's embarrassing. Why do we want to, lay that trip on people? But it is real history. It happened to real people. And I'm not trying to be like this term woke that's out there so much. I'm just trying to find the facts in an old event that had a tremendous impact on people. I also want to point out something that if we don't have all this information, it isn't all the time because it's been buried. Some things have been buried, like My grandmother wouldn't let me see my grandfather's Ku Klux Klan robe. So we do bury the history we don't want to remember. But most history, especially in rural areas, it's collected by families. And most of the time, they're most interested in showing the contributions of their family. They're not really interested in collecting your family information or your family information or mine. And so they're seldom trying to cover things up, but they just don't keep the stuff that like an outside historian might keep. And I gotta say, there are people who are resistant to even exploring the story because they really just want to remember good times, good things. That, you know, this is a wonderful area that very little anything bad happened, but bad things happen everywhere. We're all old enough and mature enough to know that. And this rounds up really the first part of this. I want to give everybody who's helped me along. There's so many more people who have helped me along the way of this story. And I so appreciate tonight Maddie McGraw, the Springfield Museum, the Springfield Library Foundation, and the Wildish Theater, Mr. John Davis here. This is the most beautiful auditorium I've ever spoken in, and I really appreciate being here. And I'm hoping that this is the first of a number of historical talks, because there are other people out there who can give real detailed, interesting talks on Springfield history, the Mohawk Valley history. The history of Wendling is interesting of itself, because this is this giant logging town that's just plopped there. And very special thanks to my wife, Karen, here, 42 years. This is when we first got married. She worked at the radio station in Cottage Grove, K&D Radio. And my next project, and I won't dwell long on this, but I just want to show you that there are more Asians out there than what we tend to remember. This is going to be one of the next things I work on with, hopefully, the Japanese American Association and folks. This Japanese colony at Shotgun Creek, owned by Robert Dollar steamships, and if your family was Asian and they came here, chances are they came here on a ship owned by the Robert Dollar Steamship Company. What the little town looked like. Now this, 1925, during Prohibition, the Eugene Morning Register, a couple of Japanese men are busted for making sake because one of them's wife had a baby. Now, fortunately, the court was very lenient. They brought in a kid from the student from the U of O as a translator, and they didn't get fined anything like what I've seen other fines made. These are the houses that are the Japanese workers. Some of them were thought to have lived in. This is the mill pond, frozen over in the 1930s. And one of the track crews out in Marcola, about 1910. So, you know, the Japanese didn't just come build a few pieces of railroad track and get kicked out. They were there for a while. This is spectacular. As an old railroad builder, I got to show you this one. This is when it was built, it was one of the largest railroad bridges in the entire world. It's over Cache Creek. It's Shotgun Creek Recreation Area. You can't get to it today, but it's 175 feet tall, approximately, and 800 feet long. That is gigantic. And finally, here in Mabel and Shotgun Creek, something I'm very interested in, wanted. This is the World War I draft list from Mabel, Oregon, just north of Marcola. We've got 6 Japanese men on this, and we've got a whole bunch of Italians and Greeks. You know, these guys are veterans too. I would like to know what happened to these guys, if possible, who were drafted for World War I. And the 1920 Mabel census has 27 Japanese and 2 families with children. Lou Polly again. And here is a Japanese man with a clipboard. Interesting enough, the timber that they cut was sent to Japan, and they brought back more workers, and they cut more wood, and they went back, sent it back to Japan, brought back and forth. It was a really, the Coast Range Logging Company out there. Oh, and yeah, just to give you context again, 1925, at the same time the guys were getting busted for making sake because of the birth of a child. That's when the Ku Klux Klan is very strong in Eugene, have a big rally over the fairgrounds. And here's the Klan out in Marcola, and a statement from the Oregon Klan lecturer who went to the Atlanta Convention in 1924, and he specifically mentions that the problem we're having out in the western states is with the Japanese and Greeks. And then the Coast Range Mill goes bankrupt. I love this picture right there. Brother Herman Ritter, minister, the Dunkard Church, they were connected with the Mennonites. And here's the little Maple Cemetery there, where either 2 or 3 Japanese people are buried. At least one of them is a child, an infant. And here are we need to do, ground penetrating radar LiDAR, but here's alleged to be the graves of 2 Japanese men. I put the markers on there. And finally, if most of you have seen, many of you have seen the movie with Jimmy Stewart, Shenandoah. They had a scene filmed in the Mohawk Valley at the Ernest Bridge. No, finally. I'm always promoting, when you go out to these areas, stop in at the little stores and restaurants, because some of them are really good. The Marcola Roadhouse Restaurant, I don't mind giving a plug for them because they have fantastic food. It's just a classic place. So, folks, thank you all so very much for coming out to the talk today.
If y'all want to stay, and you have any questions you want to ask me, I'm open for questions or comments.
Just raise your hand and I'll come over with this. You want over here?
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you retrieving so many photographs that tell us a lot about our area. I'm curious for this question about the bridge, the railroad bridge. It was so long and so big and such a stunning piece of engineering. Why can we not see it nowadays, and what condition is it in, and why were the Japanese workers involved in that particular construction project? Thank you.
Well, that I can probably project. That was part of the Coast Range Lumber Company that employed the Japanese workers, that great bridge. And that's how we have that and know it was built by Japanese. It burned, I think, from lightning. And then it was phenomenally expensive to rebuild, because you look at how much timber had to be cut to build a bridge 800 feet long and almost 200 feet tall. Yeah, it's a big endeavor. I can't imagine doing that kind of bridge work. Yeah, I can't imagine that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Steve, I was just curious if there's documentation about the McGowan School, because I know McGowan Creek probably runs 100 feet not behind where you think Ping Yang was.
Right.
So is it possible McGowan School is also Ping Yang, Donna, and Mohawk?
McGowan School that he's asking about was an older school, and Ping Yang was actually expected to replace McGowan School. But one of the descriptions of Ping Yang and its location is that it is nestled up against the creek, kind of the creek where it comes into the side of your church out there. Folks, this is the pastor of the Mohawk Community Church out there, and I was. Oh, sorry, I can't see with the light. Oh yeah, yes. So from where y'all live, I think if you, let's see, you go out your front door, throw a baseball down to the left, that sidewalk,
Right.
and then back kind of closer to the church and maybe across the road. Because the description is when they built the house that you live in, the new school, they built it slightly away from Joe Huddleston. So so it didn't get blown up. So that tells me the Ping Yang was over here to your left, and that's where he lived, over on that side to the left of the store on the hill. But when they built the new Mohawk school, yeah, then it wasn't in his sight. I guess he couldn't hear the kids as much. Yes.
You mentioned spores. Is that the same spores that the bridge over the Mackenzie is named from?
Yes.
The I-5 bridge? Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting.
He's asking about the name spores. The name spores, and you'll see it on a lot of historic things around.
Do you think Huddleston lived on the hill behind the store? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. That's what the description I have. That's what Claude Hammett, who knew him very well, knew him always, lived on the hill behind the store. And if you look at it from that perspective, then it's pretty easy to see where he would get annoyed by a school over here. But then moved over here, it might not be as noisy. And plus, after 5 attacks, they might have just gotten tired of Joe Huddleston messing with the school.
Hey, what years were the attacks? Because you never quite explicitly said that
Oh,
in the presentation.
I'm very sorry because that's important.
Yeah.
The first attack was in 1895, shortly after the Battle of Pyongyang in Korea. And the last attack was in July 1901.
When was the second attack?
1900.
When was the third attack?
1901.
When was the fourth attack?
Well, there were 2 fires that started it.
So that would have been the fourth attack.
The fourth, yeah, the first attack, second attack were fires.
Okay.
Then the third attack was the 1896 or 1895 or 1896 bombing.
Fourth
and-
attack was
1900, but I haven't found a newspaper article about that, but I found references to it in other newspaper articles.
fifth attack was
1901,
bombing or fire.
bombing. And if you read my article at asianoregon.org, it goes into all those. The only one we don't have real good documentation on, I don't know why, is the 1900. Because the others were covered very widely. This is not a unknown thing. They had newspapers all over the state covering this. So again, I get back, if it wasn't Huddleston that did it, who did? Because who else is in a position to be powerful enough and control enough stuff to be able to get away with it? Or who has that kind of stature? And if he's later elected mayor and constable and judge, why doesn't he go after the perpetrators? I mean, he's the most powerful man in the community. He certainly knew who did it if he didn't, or he could have known. This is, if it was one bombing out of the blue, maybe, but 5 attacks over 6 years, no, word gets around about who's doing that.
Why do you think Springfield didn't get involved? I mean, if we knew that there were established attacks happening in the valley, then why didn't Springfield governance get involved?
Good question. It didn't have, these were small, isolated places at the time. They didn't have jurisdiction.
They would have had mutual interest.
You would have thought,
With timber, they would have had mutual
You would have-
interest.
and you would have thought the Lane County District Attorney would have gone out there.
I would have had an inclination to say.
Yeah, but I think Joe Huddleston was just a powerful man that people were afraid to cross, and may have been very difficult to get people to testify against
So
him.
who was he doing business with in Eugene and in Springfield in order to maintain those establishments?
He did a lot of
My question.
business.
My question,
Yeah.
who were his business partners in the city?
I don't know of business partners he had, although his brother Henry Huddleston was very active in Eugene real estate. And they seem to be kind of different kind of guys.
Yeah.
Henry was a town boy, so to speak, or he did his work in Eugene,
Yeah.
whereas I don't see any evidence that Joe Huddleston left Mohawk. He was a big fish in a small pond.
Fair enough.
That was what. But yeah, I would really, there's a lot more that could be dug up on this. And, but it, takes probably university level support and some good researchers really working on it. And I've done a lot with it over the years, but I have other projects too. And a wife of 42 years.
Are there any Mohawk families or any Marcola families in the house? Anyone from the valley?
There were.
So you had the question, so that makes sense.
Yeah, these folks live in the house in the house that the school that replaced Pyongyang was built. See, the school that replaced Pyongyang wasn't attacked yet, and it's their house now.
Yeah, yeah. And
But-
Marcola
but-
families are outside family? Outside moving in? Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot more that could be dug into. Yes, sir.
Would you explain Pyongyang again? Why the name?
Oh, thank you. Pyongyang is an Americanized version of the capital of Korea, Pyongyang. Probably not even saying it correctly there, Pyongyang. But Pyongyang was an easier thing for people to write and spell. P-I-N-G-Y-A-N-G. So much easier than the long Pyongyang. And it got that Joe Huddleston, apparently he named the whole area and certainly the school almost immediately after that battle, which only took a few days. And he named it, and because, it was a battle between Japan and China with Korea in the middle, and he wanted a battle over the school. He had lost the vote for the school. The school was going to be built because, at least one source says that they had a vote. I don't have the actual Lane County election papers, or don't even know if they exist, or whether it was just a local vote, at a meeting. But any of those things could. But apparently he lost a vote, but wouldn't give up on it. And the bombing actually happened after he lost the vote. Yes.
I was interested in the children of the Japanese families and maybe the Italians and the Greeks. Do people know where they went to school?
Legally, they should have gone to the Mabel School. Whether they did, I don't know, because the records, I haven't seen I have not seen the attendance records. What year was it they required attendance records? Early 1900s, but records get lost over the years, but I haven't seen that. But they would have been, whether they went there, I don't know, but that's where they would have by rights gone, with this little Mabel School. That is actually still there. If you'd like to go to Mabel School, you can today. It is the Mohawk Community Grange, and they do a lot of wonderful work out in the area. And the Grange out there is just very involved with the community, does great work for it, and has a number. You can find them on Facebook, Mohawk Community Grange.
What road is that on?
That is on that's on Marcola Road, just when you go into Mabel. You'll see a sign goes to the right, and the little cemetery where the Japanese are supposed to be buried is right by the old school, like within 150 yards. Yeah, I really hope we can get into the cemetery and do research to see if we can find bodies in there. We got the sexton told me, the sexton's guy who runs the cemetery, told me that where the graves were, the graves of the two men, and then Jay Swafford, who lives out in Marcola, in the old Windling area, he found a death certificate with the burial of an infant in the Maple Cemetery. the little boy might not be there because a lot of times people would take their ancestor with them.
Would it be usual for Japanese women to come over for these men that were working on the railroad?
Not in the first group, but in the second wave, kind of like what we see in immigration today. The first people that come through are usually single men, and they're getting work and establishing themselves. But like it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s at Pyongyang. But by 1915, the Japanese colony, less than 15 years later, the Japanese colony just about 6 miles up the road is established. Now, it's been called, I've heard somebody say, well, there were no towns full of Japanese up there and no towns full of Chinese. Okay, how do you define town? You got colony, you got town. To me, colony is an early town. So definitely they were expecting this. Were they expecting to stay? Yes. That's what every indication I have. And I've got a couple of great stories. I talked to an elderly woman. I was too young and stupid to get her name and all the details. But she had been a little girl when in the 1920s, when that colony was happening. And one day she went to the house of a little Japanese playmate that she had. And she knocks on the door. Nobody answers. She looks in the window. Nobody's there, but all their things are there. And she said they're all thrown around. Then she goes to the next house, knocks on the door, looks in the window. Again, nobody's home, but all their things are thrown around. Next house, same thing. So that if her story is accurate, when that mill went bankrupt, those people were run out. And I can't prove that. So please look, I can't prove they were run out, I think, when the mill went bankrupt. At least not given the opportunity like most other, like I as a white man could have gone to any number of other logging companies, gotten a job the next day. But on that, no, and I don't see how, we know that the place was empty pretty much immediately after the bankruptcy. And that story that the woman, you look at stories for little details of authenticity, like that are hard to make up, like looking in the window and finding stuff all thrown around when you're used to seeing a tidy, orderly home, and your friend lives there, and nobody's there. That's so, and I don't know that this was a motive, but I do know these two factoids. One, the Robert Dollar company that owned that mill where the Japanese worked also owned gold mines in Blue River. Now, if you know anything about gold mining, you know that whites thought that all Asians were the greatest gold miners, and they were. And so one good possibility for why everything was thrown up in it like it had been searched was maybe they were looking for gold. Because the suspicion was, these inscrutable outsiders, they're going to find a way to take our gold. Now, I have heard in gold mining areas, people today referring to the gold as our gold. Not just belonging to anybody who finds it, but our meaning white people's gold. We know those people. We know these people that have more stuff than I do. But yeah, that might have been, because I know that the company did own gold mines in Blue River, and I know that the stereotype of, and keep in mind, Americans tended to, whether they were Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese, wherever, most Americans just lumped them all with Chinese. And that was that way for years and years and years. Most Americans tend to just lump them all with Chinese, but they had a great reputation for gold mining, and people were, I can see why they would have wanted to search their stuff to see if they were carrying away any of their gold. That's just possible. I cannot prove that, but it's kind of this is the way people act when it comes to gold. Any other questions? Oh, gonna run you out of questions. What? Oh, one. And she's recommending I look for diaries and old letters and the families out there. And actually, Deborah, I did do that quite a long time ago. But I wasn't very well known. People might not have been willing to share. And again, people tend to keep the stuff that's mostly directly related to their family. Might be a little something, but you know, that's a genealogy. Most people keep just the stuff that's their family. Oh, yes, if you would, I know that many of you are just dying to learn more about the Ku Klux Klan. And in Cottage Grove at the Axe and Fiddle, coming up, what's the date, Deborah? August 10th. City Councilor Dana Meriday, September 10th, thank you, September 10th. Dana Meriday, who's a city councilor in Cottage Grove, whose grandfather was in the Ku Klux Klan, like mine was, and many of y'all might not know it. But he's going to do a presentation on the Klan in Cottage Grove and surrounding areas of Oregon. So this is a really good, rare opportunity to find out not just generally stuff about the Ku Klux Klan, but what was the Klan like here? What were the issues that they were going after? I tell you the big ones were the Japanese immigrants and the Greeks and the Italians, because they Catholic and they drink in church, and that's what they thought. I mean, I grew up with that. But yeah, it was there was a the fight between Protestantism and Catholicism did not end in Europe. No. Yes.
I actually would love to go to that talk. Y'all know what time it is?
Yes, it's at
5 to 7, but get there early.
yes, 5 to 7. The Axe and Fiddle, which if you have not been in the Axe and Fiddle in Cottage Grove, it is a beautiful historic building, and it is just a great place to see an event. They have events there probably 5 nights a week, and history talks once a month. And to do a talk, this is the most beautiful, nicest theater I've ever spoken in, place I've ever spoken in. But I really like the Axe and Fiddle because it's it's a historical place. The people are a little tipsy, so you can get away with stuff. You don't get these hard questions like here, which I appreciate greatly. It shows that you were interested in it and you listened to it. And I really, really appreciate all of y'all coming out tonight. I'll stay here and talk as long as you want to, so keep the doors open. But I so much appreciate y'all coming out, and I certainly wish you a safe drive home. And thank you.
Are you going to have your booth at the Mohawk Festival tomorrow?
Thank you. Is that Lisa there?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to locate. Lisa there, as Joe Ponders just reminded me that tomorrow is the Oban Festival of Ancestors. It's at the fairgrounds.
Indoor.
Yep, indoors, air conditioning if we need it. And I'll have a booth there, and you can come ask me more questions and just enjoy the Oban Festival, which is a really beautiful event. So and dance. I gotta dance. Thank you. Thanks for remembering that, Lisa.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. And if you want to learn more about Springfield history or become a historian, we now have our photo catalog available online. Over 5,000 photographs of historic Springfield and rural East King County. We have postcards out at the front of the museum. You can grab one, it's got the link on it. And stop by the museum. We're reopen again Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thank you again for coming.